and therefore also in the moment of closing the switch, no current flows into line A. Immediately after the switch S is closed, current begins to flow over line A into the condenser C, charging this condenser up to the voltage given by the generator. When the condenser C is charged, the current in the line A and the condenser C is zero again. That is the permanent condition before closing the switch S. And also, sometime after the closing of the switch, is zero current in the line. Immediately after the closing of the switch, however, current flows for a more or less short time. With the condition of the circuit unchanged, the same generator voltage, the switch S closed on the same circuit, the current nevertheless changes, increasing from zero at the moment of closing the switch S to a maximum and then decreasing again to zero. While the condenser charges from zero voltage to the generator voltage, we then here meet a transient phenomenon in the charge of the condenser from a source of continuous voltage. Commonly, transient and permanent phenomena are superimposed upon each other. For instance, if in the circuit figure 1 we close the switch S connecting a fan motor F at the moment of closing the switch S, the current in the fan motor circuit is zero. It rapidly rises to a maximum. The motor starts its speed increases while the current decreases until finally speed and current become constant. That is, the permanent condition is reached. The transient, therefore, appears as intermediate between two permanent conditions. In the above instance, the fan motor disconnected and the fan motor running at full speed. The question then arises why the effect of a change in the conditions of an electric circuit does not appear instantaneously, but only after a transition period, requiring a finite, though frequently very short time. Hmm. Uno momento. If you want to pick up, I need just a second.
I can go for a second. So, 2. Consider the simplest case. An electric power transmission, figure 3, in the generator G electric power is produced from mechanical power and supplied to the line A. In the line A, some of this power is dissipated, the rest transmitted into the load L, where the power is used. The consideration of the electric power is the phenomenon by which the circuit readjusts itself to the change of stored energy. It may thus be said that the permanent phenomena are the phenomena of electric power, the transients the phenomena of electric energy. It is obvious, then, that transients are not specifically electrical phenomena, but occur with all forms of energy, under all conditions where energy storage takes place. Might be worth a highlight. Thus, when we start the motors propelling an electric car, a transient period of acceleration appears between the previous permanent condition of standstill and the final permanent condition of constant speed running. When we shut off the motors, the permanent condition of standstill is not reached instantly, but a transient condition of deceleration intervenes. When we open the water gates leading to an empty canal, a transient condition of flow and water level intervenes while the canal is filling until the permanent condition is reached. Thus, in the case of the fan motor in instance figure 1, a transient period of speed and mechanical energy appeared while the motor was speeding up and gathering the mechanical energy of its momentum. When turning on an incandescent lamp, the filament passes a transient of gradually rising temperature. Just as electrical transients may, under certain conditions, rise to destructive values, so transients of other forms of energy may become destructive, or may require serious consideration, as, for instance, is the case in governing high-head power waters. The column of water in the supply pipe represents a considerable amount of stored mechanical energy. When flowing at velocity under load, when flowing at velocity under load. If then full load is suddenly thrown off, it is not possible to suddenly stop the flow of water, since a rapid stopping would lead to a pressure transient of destructive value, that is, burst the pipe. Hence, the use of surge tanks, relief valves, or deflecting nozzle governors. Hence the use of surge tanks, relief valves, or deflecting nozzle governors. Inversely, if a heavy load comes on suddenly, opening the nozzle wide does not immediately take care of the load, but momentarily drops the water pressure at the nozzle, while gradually the water column acquires velocity, that is, stores energy. The fundamental condition of the appearance of a transient, thus, is such a disposition of the stored energy in the system as differs from that required by the existing conditions of the system. And any change of the condition of a system which requires a change of stored energy, or whatever form this energy may be, leads to a transient. Go up a little bit. There we go. Electrical transients have been studied more than transients of other forms of energy because electrical transients generally are simpler in nature and therefore yield more easily to a theoretical and experimental investigation. B, the theoretical side of electrical engineering is further advanced than the theoretical side of most other sciences. And especially C, the destructive or harmful effects of transients in electrical systems are far more common and more serious than other forms of energy. And engineers have therefore been driven by necessity to their careful and extensive study. The simplest form of transient occurs where the effect is directly proportional to the cause. This is generally the case in electric circuits since voltage, current, magnetic flux, etc. are proportional to each other, and the electrical transients, therefore, are usually of the simplest nature. In those cases, however, where this direct proportionality does not exist, as for instance in inductive circuits containing iron or in electrostatic fields exceeding the corona voltage, the transients are also are far more complex, and very little work has been done, and very little is known on these more complex electrical transients. Assume that in an electrical circuit we have a transient current as represented by curve I in figure 4, that is, some charge of circuit condition requires a readjustment of the stored energy, which occurs by the flow of transient current I. This current starts with the value I1 and gradually dies down to 0. Assume now that the law of proportionality between cause and effect applies. That is, if the transient current started with a different value I2, it would traverse a curve I prime, which is the same as curve I, except that all values are changed proportionally by the ratio of I2 over I1, that is, I prime equals I times I2 over I1. Starting with the current I1, the transient follows the curve I. Starting with I2, the transient follows the proportional curve I prime. At the time t, however, the current I has dropped to the value I2 with which the curve I prime started. At this moment t, the conditions in the first case of current I are the same as the conditions in the second case of the current I prime. At the moment t1, that is, from t onward, I is the same as curve I prime from the time t1 onward. Since I prime is proportional to I, from any point t onward, curve I is proportional to the same curve I from t1 onward. At time t1, it is di2 over di2 over dt1 equals di1 over dt1 times I2 over I1. But since di2 with respect to dt1 and I2 and t1 are the same as di with respect to dt and I at the time t, it follows that di over dt equals di1 over dt1 I over I1, or di over dt equals negative ci, where c equals 1 over I1 times di1 with respect to dt, and that's a constant. And the minus sign is chosen as di over dt is negative. As in figure 4, the tangent of, what do we got there? That's phi? Psi?
Yep.
Phi. The tangent of phi equals negative di1 over dt, and a1, t1 equals I1. And so then we have c equaling 1 over I1 times di1 over dt again, and that's equaling the tangent of phi over a1 t1 equaling 1 over that line over t1 t2. And that is c is the reciprocal of the projection t equaling t1 t2 on the zero line of the the segment of t1 t2 on the zero line of the tangent starting at the moment of the transient. Since C equals 1 over T, di over I equals negative C dt, that is the percentual change of current is constant, or in other words, it is the same time, or in the same time, the current always decreases by the same fraction of its value, no matter what this value is. Integrated, this equation gives the logarithm of I equals negative CL plus C, I equals AE to the power of negative ET, and I equals AE to the power of negative T over, so that was little t over big T. That is, the curve is exponential. The exponential curve, thus, is the expression of the simplest form of transient. This explains its common occurrence in electrical, and other transients. Consider, for instance, the decay of radioactive substances. The radiation, which represents the decay, is proportional to the amount of radiating material. It is dm over dt equals cm. Just one moment, I'm going to take some water here. Which leads to the same exponential function. Not all transients, however, are of the simplest form. For instance, the deceleration of a ship does not follow the exponential, but at high velocities, the decrease of speed is a greater fraction of the speed than during the same time interval at lower velocities. And the speed time curves for different initial speeds are not proportional to each other, but are shown in Figure 5. The reason is that the frictional resistance is not proportional to the speed, but to the square of the speed. Two classes of transients may occur. Energy may be stored in one form only, and the only energy change which can occur, thus, is an increase or decrease of the stored energy. Energy may be stored in two or more different forms, and the possible energy changes, thus, are an increase or decrease of the total stored energy, or a change of the stored energy from one to another. Usually, both occur simultaneously. An instance of the first case is the acceleration or deceleration of a train or a ship, etc. Here, energy can be stored only as mechanical momentum, and the transient thus consists of an increase of the stored energy during acceleration or of a decrease during deceleration. Thus, also in a low voltage electric current of negligible capacity, energy can be stored only in the magnetic field, and the transient represents an increase of the stored magnetic energy during increase of the current, or a decrease of magnetic energy during a decrease of current. An instance of the second case is the pendulum. Figure 6, with the weight at rest in in maximum elevation, all the stored energy is potential energy of gravitation. This energy changes to kinetic mechanical energy until the lowest position A, when all the potential gravitational energy has either converted to kinetic mechanical energy or dissipated. Then, during the rise of the weight, that part of the energy which is not dissipated again changes to potential gravitational energy at C, then back again to kinetic energy at A, and in this manner, the total stored energy is gradually dissipated by a series of successive oscillations or changes between potential gravitational and kinetic mechanical energy, or to produce the magnetic field psi?
I think so.
The magnetic field. Okay.
Capital Phi?
Sure. Sure. Psi or capital Phi. Is that what you said? That actually,
Yeah.
I think you might be right. Actually, I think you might be right. To produce the magnetic field phi of the current I, a voltage E prime must be consumed in the circuit, which with the current I gives the power P, which supplies the stored energy W of the magnetic field phi. This storage this voltage E prime is called inductive voltage, or voltage consumed by self-induction. Since no power is required to maintain the field, but power is required to produce it, the induction voltage must be proportional to the rate of increase of the magnetic field. E prime equals d phi over dt, or by 1, E prime equals L times di over dt. If I and therefore phi decrease, di over dt and therefore E prime are negative. That is, P becomes negative and power is returned into the circuit. The energy supplied by the power P is W equals the integral of rho dt? Or is that just a
Yes.
P?
No, that's probably rho.
And
So
then the
density.
W is actually, what's that actually called?
Yeah, so that's capital Phi.
Okay, so that was capital Phi. Is the W actually just W?
Probably not. I'll look. I think it's probably. Let's see. Yeah, works at capital. Not sure.
All right, well, we're just gonna roll with W. As long as the variable is constant, stays the same, I think we're golden.
Yeah.
So W equals the integral of rho times dt, or by 2 and 4, W equals the integral of Li di. Hence, W equals Li squared over 2. And the energy of the magnetic field, phi, equals Li of the circuit. Exactly analogous relations exist in the dielectric field. The dielectric field, or dielectric flux, psi, is proportional to the voltage E with a proportionality factor C, which is called the capacity of the circuit. So psi equals CE. The dielectric field represents the stored energy W. To produce it, power P must therefore be supplied to the circuit. Since power is current times voltage, P equals I prime E, to produce the dielectric field psi of the voltage E, a current I prime must be consumed in the circuit, which the voltage E gives are crowded together between the conductors, and the magnetic field consists of eccentric circles surrounding the conductors, as shown by the drawn lines in Figure 9. An electrostatic, or as more properly called dielectric field, issues from conductors, that is, a dielectric flux passes between the conductors, which is measured by the number of lines of dielectric force psi. With a single conductor, the lines of dielectric force are radial straight lines, as shown dotted in Figure 8. By the return conductor, they are crowded together between the conductors and form arcs or circles, or arcs of circles passing from conductor to return conductor, as shown in dotted in Figure 9. So there she is. And you can see the...
Oh, sorry, I have my mic muted. I was going to say, Eli is ready to take over when you're ready, sir. And if you want to break down these lines of force here for the boys, that'd be
Yeah,
fantastic.
so simply put, right, you've got the concentric circles. Those are the, as he said there, the magnetic... you scroll up a little bit. There you go. So the dielectric force is the so the lines that connect between the two conductors there. So the two big black dots in the middle are the conductors. One way to look at it is you could look at it as looking at like a cross section of power lines, because that would be like two conductors next to each other. But the connecting lines there, those are the dielectric force. And then the concentric circles that emanate outwards from each of those conductors, those are the, I'm going to use his verbiage. Did he not say, no, he hasn't gotten into, yeah, can you go down a little bit? But those are the magnetic,
The magnetic flux
yeah,
lines.
there you go, magnetic flux of the circuit, or phi, proportional to the current I with proportionality factor L. So yeah, but I'm happy to pass it over to Eli if he's ready to go.
I'm Did you see what I put in chat, Alan?
Yeah, you said that my pages were off. I don't know what to do about it.
I gotcha. Yeah. So, well, I got the book pulled up here. So we went from 12 to 11 instead of 11 to 12. It's fine. Do you want me to pick up at 13?
Um,
Oh,
are
that's
you
funny.
are you,
Is
are
that
you
really
at
what
this
happened?
diagram?
Yeah, I'm looking at that diagram. That's page 11.
Yeah, read it in the correct order then from where we just left off at this diagram here, as we stopped at right here at figure 9. So you're at this part, if you're able to see that.
Okay. So the magnetic and the dielectric field of the conductors both are included in the term electric field and are the two components of the electric field of the conductor. The magnetic field or magnetic flux of the circuit phi is proportional to the current I with a proportionality factor L, which is called the inductance of the circuit. The phi equals inductance I. I mean, these formulas are fun. I love algebra. The magnetic field represents stored energy W. To produce it, power P must therefore be supplied by the circuit, since power is current times voltage. P equals E prime I. Notation N phi if the flux interlinks the circuit N fold. Because magnetics are fun. 12 we read. I'm gonna go to 13. The power P, which supplies the stored energy of the dielectric field, the current I prime is called the capacity current or wrongly charging current or condenser current. Since no power is required to maintain the field, but power is required to produce it, the capacity current must be proportional to the rate of increase of the dielectric field. I prime equals d psi over dt, or by figure 6, I prime equals C times dE over dt. If E and therefore psi decrease, dE over dt, and therefore I prime are negative, that is, P, power becomes negative, and power is returned into the circuit. The energy supplied by the power P is W equals integral P times dt, or by 7 and 9, W equals the integral times CE dE. Hence, W equals CE squared over 2. Is the energy of the dielectric field psi equals CE of the circuit? As seen, the capacity current is the exact analogy with regard to the dielectric field of the inductance voltage with regard to the magnetic field. The representations in the electric circuit of the energy storage in the field. The dielectric field of the circuit thus is treated and represented in the same manner and with the same simplicity and perspicuity as the magnetic field by using the same conception of lines of force. Unfortunately, to a large extent in dealing with the dielectric fields, the prehistoric conception of the electrostatic charge on the conductor still exists, and by its use destroys the analogy between the two components of the electric field, the magnetic and the dielectric, and makes the consideration of dielectric fields unnecessarily complicated. There obviously is no more sense in thinking of the capacity current as current, which charges the conductor with a quantity of electricity, than there is of speaking of the inductance voltage as charging the conductor with a quantity of magnetism. But while the latter conception, together with the notion of a quantity of magnetism, etc., has vanished since Faraday's representation of the magnetic field by the lines of magnetic force, the terminology of electrostatics of many textbooks still speaks of electric charges on the conductor and the energy stored by them, without considering that the dielectric energy is not on the surface of the conductor, but in the space outside of the conductor, just as the magnetic energy. Oh, that's interesting. Um, yeah, okay, never mind. Yeah, so energy doesn't travel in the line or on the line, it's actually around it. But yeah, that's cool. All the lines of magnetic force are closed upon themselves. All the lines of dielectric force terminate at conductors, as seen in figure 8, and the magnetic field and the dielectric field thus can be considered as a magnetic circuit and a dielectric circuit. To produce a magnetic flux of phi, a magnetomotive force F is required. Since the magnetic field is due to the current and is proportional to the current, or in a coiled current to the current times the number of turns, magnetomotive force is expressed in current terms or ampere terms. Force equals Ni. I need a chart of what these letters mean. If F is the MMF, L the length of the magnetic circuit energized by F. Uh, little f equals force over L, or length. It's called the magnetizing force or magnetic gradient and is expressed in ampere turns per centimeter, or industrially sometimes in ampere turns per inch. In empty space, and therefore also with very close approximation, in all non-magnetic material, F ampere turns per centimeter length of magnetic circuit produce, I don't know that symbol, equals 4 pi
Not
F
familiar with that one either.
to the 10 negative 1 lines of magnetic force per centimeter section of the magnetic circuit. Here, the factor 10 to the negative 1 results from the ampere being 10 to the negative 1 of the absolute or CGS of unit of current. I really wish I knew that. Whatever that is equals 4 pi F 10. So this is talking about your turns. Okay, page 15, the electric field. Here, the factor 10 to the negative 1 results from the ampere being 10 to the negative 1, so the absolute or CGS unit of current is called the magnetic field intensity. It is the magnetic density, that is the number of lines of magnetic force per centimeter squared produced by the magnetizing force of F ampere turns per centimeter. In empty space, the magnetic density in lines of magnetic force per centimeter squared produced by the field intensity in any material is.
Pretty sure
See,
that's a
I need
B.
yeah,
Pretty sure
that's
just
a
B.
B.
And I would just call the other one H for now because that looks very H-y. So,
Yeah, and then what's the little u again?
mu. No.
Yeah,
Yes, mu.
mu. Yeah. Okay, so B equals mu H. I need an index of terms here. Where mu is a constant of the material, a magnetic conductivity is called the permeability. Mu equals 1, or very nearly so, for most materials, with the exception of the very few, the so-called magnetic materials: iron, cobalt, nickel, and some alloys and oxides of these metals, and of manganese and chromium. If then A is the section of the magnetic current circuit, the total magnetic flux is phi equals AB. Obviously, if the magnetic field is not uniform, equations 13 and 16 would be correspondingly modified. F in 13 would be the average magnetizing force, while the actual magnetizing force would vary, being higher at the denser and lower at the less dense parts of the magnetic circuit. F equals dF over dL. In 16, the magnetic flux phi would be derived by integrating the densities B over the total section of the magnetic circuit. Entirely analogous relations exist in the dielectric circuit. To produce a dielectric flux psi, an electromotive force E is required, which is measured in volts. The EMF per unit length of the dielectric circuit then is called the electrifying force, or the voltage gradient, and is G equals E over L. Okay. He's got a footnote at the bottom of the page. I'm going to skip. This gives the average voltage gradient, while the actual gradient in a uniform field, as that between two conductors varies, being higher at the denser and lower at the less dense portion of the field, and is G equals D over DL, which is figure 19, and K equals G over 4 pi with a footnote. Then is the dielectric field intensity, and D equals little k times K, 20, would be the dielectric density, where K is a constant of the material, the electrostatic or dielectric conductivity, and is called the specific capacity or permittivity for empty space, and thus with close approximation for air and other gases. Little k equals 1 over voltage squared, where B equals 3 times 10 to the 10 is the velocity of light. It is customary, however, and convenient to use the permittivity of empty space as unity. Little k equals 1. This changes the unit of dielectric field intensity by the factor 1 over voltage squared and gives dielectric field intensity. Big K equals G over 4 pi times voltage squared, 21, and then dielectric density, D equals little k times K, 22, where little k equals 1 for empty space, and between 2 and 6 for most solids and liquids, rarely increasing beyond 6, except in materials of appreciable electric conductivity. The dielectric flux is psi equals AD. As seen, the dielectric and the magnetic fields are entirely analogous, and the corresponding values are tabulated in the following table 1. And then you've got the footnote highlighted here. The factor 4 pi appears here in the denominator as the result of the factor 4 pi in the magnetic field intensity. Oh, that's okay, so that's what that's for. Due to the relations between these quantities, so that's intensity. And then we got the table. You want me to read the table or go straight to the paragraph?
It's up to you, dog. You can get straight to the paragraph.
Yeah. The powers of 10, which appear in some expressions, are reduction factors between the absolute or CGS units, which are used for phi intensity, still haven't resolved the B yet, and the practical electrical units used for other constants. As the magnetic field and the dielectric field also can be considered as the magnetic circuit and the dielectric circuit, some analogy exists between them and the electric circuit, and in Table 2, the corresponding terms of the magnetic circuit, the dielectric circuit, and the electric circuit are given. Another table here, going through your magnetic circuit, your dielectric circuits, your electric circuits. It's basically a bunch of different equations for your electric gradient, your electric current density, all that good stuff. Yeah, if you wanted to build some stuff, here you go. Lecture 3. Keep going.
Yeah, what does it look like on your end? Or yeah, are you on lecture 2 now?
Um, no, lecture 2 was where the diagram was. So yeah, that was the beginning of lecture 2 was where we started that diagram. I got
Uh,
page numbers on mine.
Hmm.
oh yeah, you're
Can you
right. That is
send me?
page 2.
Can you send me your document? How about that?
Yeah, I don't know why your pages
How'd you
are
get a
out of
different
order.
document, dog? What the hell
It's the
happened?
same, just with the pages out of order.
Dude, what? That's crazy.
The
Hey,
one
what?
it's already in Discord chat. It's the one I dropped. I'm pretty sure is what he's looking at.
Oh, okay, here we go.
Yeah, I'm looking at the one that Alan dropped. It's or Toby dropped. It's literally the book basically just photo scanned in. So I got all the pages and everything here. I'm sharing my screen so you can see it.
Oh, you're okay. You're sharing. 1 second. I'll just watch you, and that will cut out the middleman. You're not sharing. You lied.
It's not. It's not sharing.
Uh-uh.
Nope.
Nope. Now you are.
How about now?
Yep. There we go. Awesome.
Okay. So
Yeah, it was way different
all right. So this is
than.
where we were.
Yeah. Oops. Save.
And so here I'll go back real quick so that y'all can see it. So you actually, I think, missed this page right here and went to this one. But we'll go straight to lecture 3 here. Single energy transients and continuous current circuits.
Yo, Eli, I don't think it's gonna work with you
The
sharing.
simplest electrical
Yeah.
transients
Yo, Eli.
are those
I'm
in
gonna.
circuits in which energy
1
can be
sec.
stored in one
Yeah, I'm just
form
gonna pull it up
only, as in
for
this case.
everyone.
Yo, Eli, we're gonna pull it up on our end. Give us 1 second.
Yeah,
'Cause-
no, it's fine. Was it lagging with me sharing?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Unfortunately.
But fortunately, we're on the same section. It just looks slightly different. So you're good to continue whenever you're ready, sir.
Yo, thanks, Alan.
All right. So, starting over, the simplest electrical transients are those in circuits in which energy can be stored in one form only. As in this case, the change of stored energy can consist only of an increase or decrease. but no surge or oscillation between several forms of energy can exist. Such circuits are most of the low and medium voltage circuits, your 220 volt, 600 volt, and 2200 volts. In them, the capacity is small due to the limited extent of the circuit, resulting from the low voltage, and at the low voltage, the dielectric energy thus is negligible. That is, the circuit stores appreciable energy only by the magnetic field. A circuit of considerable capacity but negligible inductance, if of high resistance, would also give one form of energy storage only in the dielectric field. The usual high voltage capacity circuit, as that of an electrostatic machine, while of very small inductance, also is of very small resistance, and the momentary discharge currents may be very considerable, so that in spite of the very small inductance, considerable magnetic energy storage may occur. That is, the system is one storing energy in two forms, and oscillations appear as in the discharge of the Leyden jar. Let, as represented in figure 10, a continuous voltage be impressed upon a wire coil of resistance R and inductance L, but negligible capacity. A current, what's the little zero there?
Just say not. So like E not.
Okay, so a current I naught equals E naught over resistance. So energy naught over resistance flows through the coil. A magnetic field phi naught times 10 to the negative 8 equals inductance I naught over N interlinks with the coil. Assuming now that the voltage E naught is suddenly withdrawn without changing the constants of the coil circuit, as for instance by short circuiting the terminals of the coil as indicated at A. With no voltage impressed upon the coil and thus no power supplied to it, current I and magnetic flux phi of the coil must finally be zero. Okay. However, since the magnetic flux represents stored energy, it cannot instantly vanish, but the magnetic flux must gradually decrease from its initial value, phi naught, by the dissipation of its stored energy in the resistance of the coil circuit as um, current uh, current squared resistance. Uh, Plotting, therefore, the magnetic flux of the coil as function of the time in figure 11a, the flux is constant and denoted by phi naught up to the moment of time where the short circuit is applied, is indicated by the dotted line T naught. From T naught on, the magnetic flux decreases as shown by curve phi, since the magnetic flux is proportional to the current. The latter must follow a curve proportional to phi as shown in figure 11b. The impressed voltage is shown in figure 11c as a dotted line. It is E naught up to T naught and drops to zero at T naught. However, since after T naught a current uh, voltage flows, an EMF must exist in the circuit proportional to the current. Energy equals resistance times uh, current. This is the EMF induced by the decrease of magnetic flux phi and is therefore proportional to the rate of decrease of phi, that is to d phi over dt. In the first moment of short circuit, the magnetic flux phi still has full value phi naught, and the current thus also full value current naught. Hence, at the first moment of short circuit, the induced EMF E must be equal to E naught. That is, the magnetic flux phi must begin to decrease at such rate as to induce full voltage E naught, as shown in Figure 11c. The three curves of phi, uh, voltage, and current, phi current, and E are proportional to each other, and as E is proportional to the rate of change of phi must be proportional to its own rate of change, and thus also I and E, that is the transients of magnetic flux, current, and voltage, follow the law of proportionality, hence are simple exponential functions as seen in lecture 1. So that's a fun little equation there. The
Equation
phi
one.
I
There you
and E,
go.
yeah, yeah. I need an index sit next to me with what all these letters are for. Phi, I, and E decrease most rapidly at first and then slower and slower, but can theoretically never become zero. though practically they become negligible in a finite time. The voltage E is induced by the rate of change of the magnetism and equals the decrease of the number of lines of magnetic force, divided by the time during which this decrease occurs, multiplied by the number of turns N of the coil. The induced voltage E times the time during which it is induced, thus equals N times the decrease of the magnetic flux, and the total induced voltage, that is the area of the induced voltage curve, figure 11c, thus equals N times the total decrease of magnetic flux, that is equals the initial current I naught times the inductance L. Another fun little equation. Whatever, therefore, may be the rate of decrease or the shape of the curves of phi, I, and E, the total area of the voltage curve must be the same and equal to N phi naught equals inductance and current naught. So if then the current I would continue to decrease at its initial rate as shown dotted in figure 11b, as could be caused, for instance, by a gradual increase of the resistance of the coil circuit, the induced voltage would retain its initial value E naught up to the moment of time t equals T naught plus T, where the current has fallen to zero as shown dotted in figure 11c. The area of this new voltage curve would be E naught T, and since it is the same as that of the curve E as seen above, it follows that the area of the voltage curve E is uh what is that? What is that symbol?
Sigma.
That's sigma? Okay. Sigma ET equals E naught T equals RI naught T. Okay. And combining 2 and 3, I naught cancels and we get the value of T. T equals L over R. That is the initial decrease of current and therefore of magnetic flux and of induced voltage is such that if the decrease continued at the same rate, the current, flux, and voltage would become zero after the time T equals L over R. The total induced voltage, that is voltage times time, and therefore also the total current and magnetic flux during the transient, are such that when maintained at their initial value, they would last for the time T equals L over R. Since the curves of current and voltage theoretically never become zero, to get an estimate of the duration of the transient, we may determine the time in which the transient decreases to half or to 1/10, etc., of its initial value. It is preferable, however, to estimate the duration of the transient by the time t, which it would last if maintained at its initial value. That is, the duration of a transient is considered as the time t equals L over R. This time t has frequently been called the time constant of the circuit. The higher the inductance L, the longer the transient lasts, obviously, since the stored energy which the transient dissipates is proportional to L. The higher the resistance, the shorter is the duration of the transient, since in the higher resistance, the stored energy is more rapidly dissipated. Using the time constant T equals LR as unit of length for the abscissa and the initial value as unit of the ordinance, all exponential transients have the same shape and can thereby be constructed by the numerical values of the exponential function y equals e, and I can't even see those letters, given in table 3. As seen in Lecture 1, the coefficient of the exponent of the
It's
single energy
epsilon.
transients.
That E. It's epsilon.
And then there's a squiggly and an X. Is that whole thing epsilon?
Yeah, so it's y equals epsilon minus x, or like to the minus x.
To the negative X. Okay. Negative whatever energy.
Yep.
Okay. As seen in Lecture 1, the coefficient of the exponent of the single energy transient C is equal to 1 over T, where T is the projection of the tangent at the starting moment of the transient as shown in figure 11, and by equation 4 was found equal to L over R. That is, C equals 1 over T equals R over L. And the equations of the single energy magnetic transient thus may be written in the forms, yeah. Usually, the starting moment of the transient is chosen as the zero of time, t naught equals 0, in equations 5, then assume the simpler form. So this is basically describing electricity and how the greater the voltage is, like the greater the pressure. Am I understanding this correctly?
The flow and how like the density of the magnetic field and all that will all be proportional to the current flowing through it.
Yeah, and which is almost exactly how pressure works as well. Like with the way it discharges, right? The more pressure you build up, the faster it discharges. The same we find in electricity. The more amperage and the more we're able to basically the more high voltage you're able to store, the faster it discharges. Which is why high voltage is so dangerous. Things of that nature. It also goes further. The same with pressure. Basically, how electricity mimics, our tangible world. There's nothing magical about it. I'm
Yeah,
liking this. All
it's
right, the same.
yeah, it's just highly describing pressure mediation, right? High to low, and the densities involved with that flow.
Yeah, yeah. What I really like about it though is the magnetic field, which it hasn't gotten into a whole lot of that, but I learned this a while ago. Like a lot of people think that electricity flows in a wire or it flows on a wire, but it actually does neither. It actually flows in a vortex around the wire, and there's actually an insulated space between the wire and
How
the
dare
current.
you?
Yeah, I know, right? So that's what this is talking about as well. That's really cool. Okay. And this is from 1914, so truly it's not like, this is
Yeah. I
cool
mean, this
stuff.
is the backbone of everything, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Yeah, so anyways, all right. So the same equations may be derived directly by the integration of the differential equation. L times d over I, uh, or L times di over dt plus ri equals 0, where L times di over dt is the inductance voltage, ri the resistance voltage, and their sum equals 0 as the coil is short circuited. Equation 7 transpose gives di over I equals negative r over L dt. Hence, logarithm equals negative r over L times t plus log c. I equals c, whatever you said that was, negative r over L times t.
oh yeah, epsilon.
Epsilon, yeah, that one. There, I was waiting for it. And as for t equals 0, I equals I naught, it is c equals I naught. Hence, I equals I naught epsilon negative RL times t, R over L times t. Usually, single energy transients last an appreciable time and thereby become of engineering importance only in highly inductive currents as motor fields, magnetics, etc. To get an idea on the duration of such magnetic transients, consider a motor field. A four-polar motor has 8 megalines of magnetic flux per pole produced by 6,000 ampere turns MMF per pole and dissipates normally 500 watts in the field excitation. That is, if I naught equals field exciting current, N equals number of field turns per pole, R equals resistance, and L equals inductance of the field exciting circuit, it is I naught squared R equals 500, hence R equals 500 over I naught squared. The magnetic flux is phi naught equals 8 times 10 to the 6th. And with 4 n total turns, the total number of magnetic interlinkages thus is 4 times n phi naught equals 32 n times 10 to the 6th. Hence the inductance L. Okay. The field exit. Yeah. Okay. Y'all can see all that. We'll pause here for like 5 seconds for the math if anybody likes it.
Hey, I need to know
And
exactly how many Henrys that is. Now
I
that
don't know. No one.
no, they're talking about the electric permeativity and magnetic permeability. It's measured in Henrys and I think Faradays or something. Yeah, Faradays. So the Henrys is the electric one, and the Faradays would be the magnetic one, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Okay. Who was Henry? Why'd they name it after Henry?
Couldn't tell you, brother. Didn't get that far in Henry class.
All right. That is the stored magnetic energy could maintain full field excitation for nearly 4 seconds. It is interesting to note that the duration of the field discharge does not depend on the voltage, current, or size of the machine, but merely on first the magnetic flux in MMF, which determine the stored magnetic energy, and second on the excitation power, which determines the rate of energy dissipation. Assume now that in the moment where the transient begins, the resistance of the coil in figure 10 is increased. That is, the coil is not short circuited upon itself, but its circuit closed by a resistance or R prime. Such would, for instance, be the case in figure 12 when opening the switch S. Oh, all right. The transients of magnetic flux, current, and voltage are shown as A, B, and C in figure 13. The magnetic flux and therewith the current decrease from the initial values phi naught and I naught at the moment T naught of opening the switch S on curves which must be steeper than those in figure 11, since the current passes through a greater resistance, R plus R prime, and thereby dissipates the stored magnetic energy at a greater rate. The impressed voltage E naught is withdrawn at the moment T naught, and a voltage thus induced from this moment onward of such value as to produce the current I through the resistance R plus R prime. In the first moment T naught, the current is still I naught, and the induced voltage thus must be E naught prime equals I naught times R plus R prime, while the impressed voltage before T naught was E naught equals I naught R. Hence, the induced voltage E naught prime is greater than the impressed voltage E naught in the same ratio as the resistance of the discharge circuit R plus R prime is greater than the resistance of the coil R through which the impressed voltage sends the current. E naught prime over E naught equals R plus R prime over R. The duration of the transient now is T equals L over R plus R prime. That is shorter in the same proportion as the resistance, and thereby the induced voltage is higher. If R prime equals infinity, that's infinity, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if R prime equals a constant, because I think they considered it a constant back then, not infinity, right? Um, So if R prime equals infinity, that is, no resistance is in shunt to the coil, but the circuit is simply opened. If the opening were instantaneous, it would be E naught prime equals infinity. That is, an infinite voltage would be induced. That is, the insulation of the coil would be punctured and the circuit closed in this manner. The more rapid, thus, the opening of an inductive circuit, the higher is the induced voltage and the greater the danger of breakdown. Hence, it is not safe to have two rapid circuit opening devices on inductive circuits. To some extent, the circuit protects itself by an arc following the blades of the circuit opening switch and thereby retarding the circuit opening. The more rapid the mechanical opening of the switch, the higher the induced voltage, and further, therefore, the arc follows the switch blades and maintains the circuit. Similar transients, as discussed above, occur when closing the circuit upon an impressed voltage, or changing the voltage, or the current, or the resistance or inductance of the circuit. A discussion of the infinite variety of possible combinations obviously would be impossible. However, they can all be reduced to the same simple case discussed above by considering that several currents, voltages, magnetic fluxes, etc., in the same circuit add algebraically without interfering with each other, assuming as done here that magnetic saturation is not approached. If an EMF E1 produces a current I1 in a circuit and an EMF E2 produces in the same circuit a current I2, then the EMF E1 plus E2 produces the current I1 plus I2, as is obvious. If now the voltage E1 plus E2, and thus also the current I1 plus I2, consists of a permanent term E1 and I1 and a transient term E2 and I2, the transient terms E2, I2 follow the same curves when combined with the permanent terms E1, I1 as they would when alone in the circuit. Case above is discussed. Thus, the preceding discussion applies to all magnetic transients by separating the transient from the permanent term, investigating it separately, and then adding it to the permanent term. Anybody else want to pick up for a little bit?
Dude, you nailed it. Yeah, I'll read a little bit. So the same reasoning also applies to the transient resulting from several forms of energy storage, provided that the law of proportionality of I equal, or I'm sorry, IE and phi, etc., applies and makes it possible for for investigating the phenomenon during the transition period of energy readjustments to separate the permanent and the transient term and discuss them separately, given by this graph here that we're going to slide by, shown in figure 14. So, for instance, in the coil shown in figure 10, let the short circuit A be opened, that is, the voltage E naught be impressed upon the coil. At the moment in time T naught, when this is done, the current I, magnetic flux psi, and voltage E on the coil are zero. In the final condition, after the transient has passed, the values I naught, psi naught, and E naught are reached. We may then, as discussed above, separate the transients from permanent from the permanent term and consider that at the time T naught that the coil has a permanent current I naught, permanent flux psi naught, permanent voltage E naught. In addition thereto, the transient current minus I naught is a transient flux minus psi naught and transient voltage minus E naught. These transients are the same in figure 11, only with the reverse directions. Thus, the same curves result to find them when they are added to the permanent values of I naught, psi naught, and E naught. This is shown in figure 14. A shows the A shows the permanent flux of psi naught and the transit flux of psi naught, which are assumed up to the time T naught to give the resultant zero flux. The transient flux dies out by the curve psi prime in accordance with figure 11, or I'm sorry, phi prime. Phi prime added to phi naught gives the curve phi, which is the transient from the zero flux to the permanent flux phi naught. In the same manner, B shows the construction of the actual current change I and the addition of the permanent current I naught and the transient current I prime, which starts from minus I naught to or at T naught. C then shows the voltage relation E naught, the permanent voltage E prime, the transient voltage which starts from minus E naught at T naught, and E at the resultant or effective voltage in the coil derived by adding E naught and E prime. Lecture 4: Single energy transients in alternating current circuits. Whenever the conditions of an electric current are changed in such a manner as to require the change of a store of energy, a transition period appears during which the stored energy adjusts itself from the conditions existing before the change in the condition after the change. The currents in the circuit during the transition period can be considered as consisting of the superposition of the permanent current corresponding to the conditions after the change and the transient current which connects the current value before with the change which was brought about by that change. Let's see. That is, if I sub 1 equals current existing in the circuit immediately before and thus at the moment at the moment of the change in the circuit condition, and I2 or I sub 2 equals the current which exists at the moment of change in accordance with the circuit condition after the change, then the actual current I sub 1 can be considered as consisting of a part of a component I sub 2, and the component of I sub 1 minus I sub 2 equals I naught. The former, I sub 2, is permanent as resulting from the established circuit condition. The current component, I naught, however, is not produced by any power supply, but is a remnant of the previous circuit condition, that is, a transient, and is therefore gradually decreases in the manner as discussed in the in paragraph 13, that is, with the duration of T equals L over R. The permanent current, I sub 2, may be continuous or alternating, or may be a changing current as a transient of a long duration, etc. The same reasoning applies to the voltage, magnetic flux, etc. Thus, let an alternating current circuit traversed by a current I sub 1 in figure 15a, the conditions be changed at the moment t equals 0 so as to produce the current I sub 2. The instantaneous value of the current I sub 1 at the moment t equals 0 can be considered as consisting of the instantaneous value of the permanent current I sub 2 shown dotted and the transient I naught equals I sub 1 minus I sub 2. The latter gradually dies down with the duration of t equals L over R on the usual exponent transient, shown dotted in figure 15. Adding the transient current I naught to the permanent current I sub 2 gives the total current during the transition period, which is shown in the drawn line in figure 15. As seen, the transient is due to the difference between the instantaneous value of the current I sub 1, which exists, and that of the current I sub 2, which should exist at the moment of change, and thus is the larger, the greater the difference, thus is larger, the greater the difference between the two currents, the previous and after the current. It is it thus disappears if the change occurs in the moment when the two currents I sub 1 and I sub 2 are equal, as shown in figure 15b, and is the maximum. If the change occurs at the moment when the two currents I sub 1 and I sub 2 have the greatest difference, as shown in figure 15c, that is a 0.1 period or 90-degree distance from the intersection of I sub 1 and I sub 2. If the current I sub 1 is 0, we get the starting of the alternating current in an inductive circuit as shown in figure 16, A, B, and C. The starting transient is 0 and the circuit is closed, or if the circuit is closed at the moment when the permanent current would be 0, figure 16b, and is the maximum when closing the current at the maximum point of the permanent current wave shown in figure 16c. The permanent current and the transient components are shown in the dotted figure 16. Resultant or actual current are current in drawn lines. So here we have our graphs here, figure 16. Applying the proceeding to the starting of the balanced three-phase system, we see in Figure 17a that in general the three transients I sub 1 0, I sub 2 0, and I sub 3 0 of the three-phase circuits I sub 1, I sub 2, and I sub 3 are different, and thus are also the shape of the three resultant currents during the transition period. Starting at the moment of 0 current of the phase I sub 1, figure 17b, there is no transient for this current, while the transients of the other two currents I sub 2 and I sub 3 are equal and opposite and near their maximum value. Starting in figure 17c, at the maximum value of one current I sub 3, we have a maximum value of transient for the current I sub 3 0, or to the 0 power. I don't know how you would say that, but anyway, while the transients of the two currents I sub 1 and I sub 2 are equal, have half of the value I sub 3 to the 0th power, and are in opposite direction thereto. In any case, the three transients must be distributed on both sides of the 0 line. This is obvious if I sub 1 prime and I sub 2 prime and I sub 3 prime are the instantaneous values of the permanent three-phase currents in figure 17. The initial values for the transients are minus I sub 1, minus I sub 1 prime, minus I sub 2 prime, and minus I sub 3 prime. Single energy starting transient of the three-phase. And that's figure 17. Since the sum of the three-phase currents at every moment is 0, the sum of the initial values of the three transient currents is also 0. Since the three transient curves I sub 1 to the 0 all the way to the third one there are proportional to each other, the exponential curves are the same duration, t equals L over R, and the sum of their initial values is 0. It follows that the sum of their instantaneous values must be 0 at any moment, and therefore the sum of their instantaneous values of their resultant currents, as shown in the drawn line, must be 0 at any moment, not only during the permanent condition, but also during the transition period existing before the permanent condition is reached. It is interesting to apply this to the resultant magnetic field produced by the three equal phase magnetizing coils placed under equal angles. That is, to the starting of the three-phase rotating magnetic field, or in general, apply a polyphase rotating magnetic field. So we got our diagram here in figure 18. As is well known, three equal magnetizing coils placed under equal angles and excited by three-phase currents produce a resultant magnetic field which is constant in intensity but revolves synchronously in space and thus can be represented by a concentric circle shown in figure A, or shown by A or alpha in figure A. So let's take a look here. Figure 18. And where's alpha at? Anyone see our boy alpha? Got little A over
Lower
here.
right.
Lower right. Yeah. So just this. Okay. So Stone, yo, what up, Stone? Welcome. This is, let's see, this, however, applies only to the permanent condition. In the moment of start, all three currents are zero, and the resultant magnetic field thus is also zero, as shown above. This, or since this magnetic field represents stored energy and thus it cannot be produced instantaneously, a transient must appear in the building up of the rotational field. This can be studied by considering separately the permanent and the transient components of the three currents, as is done in the preceding. Let I sub 1 prime through I sub 3 prime be the instantaneous values of the permanent currents at the moment of the closing circuit t equals 0. Combined with these would give the resultant field A0 naught in figure 18. The three transit currents is the the three transit currents in this moment are given by I sub Stone. How do you say this? I sub 1 to the
I
0th?
call that I sub 1 naught and negative
Okay.
I sub 1 prime. I sub 2 naught.
Yeah, gotcha.
Will be
gotcha.
naught. Will be sub
Gotcha.
naught. Yeah.
So you just throw a knot on there. You don't have to say anything additional. Gotcha.
In that case, yeah, it's just a further determination of position.
Cool. Okay, so we got our given by that equation here, and combined, these give a resultant field OB naught equal and opposite to the 0A naught in figure
The
18.
line over the top, by the way, is average for the value.
Thank you. I didn't even see that. Yes. Thank you. The average of those. This permanent field rotates synchronously on the concentric circle alpha. The transient field is the average of OB remains constant in the direction of the average of OB naught, since all three transient components are current of current decrease proportional to each other. The decrease, however, with the decrease of the transit currents, that is, shrinks together on the line of the average of B naught B naught O. The resultant or actual field thus is in combination of the permanent fields shown by uh, OA, OA1 and OA2, and the transient fields as shown by OB1 and OB2, etc., and then derived thereby the
I
parallelogram
believe those are
law.
segments.
What's that?
I believe those are like segments.
Okay.
With the lines over, yeah, very possibly. We got to be checking with the diagram again.
Yeah. Okay, so they're derived thereby by the parallelogram law as shown in figure 18 as by OC1 and OC2, etc. In this diagram, B1 and C1, B2, C2, etc. are equal to O1A or OA1 and OA2, etc. That is to the radius of the permanent circle alpha. That is, while the rotating field in the permanent condition is represented by the concentric circle alpha, the resultant field during the transient or starting period is represented by the succession of the arcs of the circle C, the centers of which move from B naught in the moment of the start on the line B naught O toward O, and can be constructed here by drawing from the successive points B naught, B1, and B2, which correspond to the successive moments of time 0, T1, T2, etc. the radii B1, C1, B2, C2, etc. under the angles, that is, in the direction corresponding to the time 0, T1, T2, etc. This is done in figure 9, thereby the transient of the rotating field is constructed. So here we have figure 19, the starting transient of the rotating field, polar form. Very nice. From this polar diagram of the rotating field in figure 19, the values OC, or the segment OC or average of OC, can now be taken corresponding to the successive moments of time and plotted in a rectangular coordinate as done in figure 20. As seen, the rotating field builds up from 0 at the moment of closing in the circuit and thus reaches the final value by a series of oscillations, that is, and first reaches beyond the permanent value, then drops below it, rises again beyond it, etc. So here we have our figure 20. We have here an oscillatory transit produced in a system with only one form of stored energy, magnetic energy, by the combination of several simple exponential transients. However, it must be considered that while the energy can be stored only in one form as magnetic energy, it can be stored in three electrical circuits and a transfer of stored magnetic energy between the three electric circuits, and therewith a surge thus can occur. It is interesting to note that the rotating field transit is independent of the point of the wave which the circuit is closed. That is, while the individual transits of the three-phase currents vary in shape with the point of the wave at which they start, as shown in figure 17, their polyphase resultant always has the same oscillating approach to a uniform rotating field of a duration of t equals L over R. The maximum value of the magnetic field during the transition period can be reached. It's limited to less than double the final value, as is obvious from the construction of the field in figure 19. It is evident herefrom, however, that the apparatus containing the rotating field as induction motors, polyphase, synchronous machines, etc., the resultant field may, under transit conditions, reach nearly double the value, if then reaches far above the magnetic saturation. Momentary currents may appear similar as the starting transformers of high magnetic density. And in polyphase rotary apparatus, however, the momentary starting currents usually are far more limited than in transformers by the higher stray field. The self-inductive reactance, etc., of the apparatus results from a gap in the magnetic, from a air gap in the magnetic current. So, Stone, are they kind of talking about that cold energy thing that you were talking about? Like when you're running a permanent current to something and then you shut it off and there's like that residual energy left over kind of thing for a couple seconds, or like fractions of a second. Is that kind of what they're talking about?
Well, in any inductive situation, there is something like that to consider, but I don't see him approaching that from a switching point of view. I think this is more similar to a phenomenon they call bucking fields, and it's something you find in toroidal geometry more often when you have more than one conductor set on a core, where one polarity could necessarily be pushing against the other for some part of the phase. Here they're talking about where the phases are kind of mutually canceling each other out, although there are three, which is a really interesting kind of asymmetry going on within its own symmetry. But um, a distant cousin of the concept, I would say.
Okay, cool. Cool, cool. All right, thank you. All right. So 19. As instance of the use of the single energy transit in engineering calculations may be considered the investigation of the momentary short circuit phenomenon of synchronous alternators. In alternators, especially high speed, high power machines as turbo alternators, the momentary short circuit current may be many times greater than the final or permanent short circuit current. and this excess current usually decreases fairly slowly, lasting for many cycles. At the same time, a big current rush occurs in the field. This excess field current shows the continuous pulsation of a single and of a double frequency, and in the beginning of the amateur current also shows the unsymmetrical shapes. Armature. Beginning of the armature current. Beginning of the armature current. Okay. Some oscillograms of three phase, quarter phase, and single phase short circuits of turbo alternators are shown in figures 25 to 28. By considering the transits of energy storage, these rather complex appearing phenomenon can be easily understood and predetermined from the constants of the machine with reasonable exactness. In an alternator, the voltage of the load can be affected by the armature reaction and the armature self-induction. What does that mean, armature? An armature self-induction.
Well, it's about not using magnets opposite the coils. It's about using self-exciting coils opposite the coils, and they're called armatures.
Okay.
And one is kind of inducing in the other, just the way the faces are knocking against each other.
Got you. So it's like the orientation of how it's set up then?
Yeah, the rotor stator relationship, really, or simply put.
Gotcha. Under permanent conditions, both usually act in the same way, reducing the voltage at the non-inductive and still much more at inductive load, and increasing at the anti-inductive load, and both are usually combined in one quantity, the synchronous reactance X naught. The transient resulting from the circuit changes as short circuits, the self-inductive armature reactance and magnetic armature reaction act very differently. And we have a little asterisk here to look at later. The former is the instantaneous in its effect, while the latter requires time. The self-inductive armature reactance X sub 1 consumes the voltage at X sub 1 I and the magnetic flux surrounding the armature conductors, by which results from the MMF of the armature current and therefore requires a component of the magnetic field flux for its production. As the armature magnetic flux and the current which produces it must be simultaneous, for the former being the integral part of the phenomenon of the current flow as seen in the lecture 2, it thus follows that the armature reactance appears together, and then we're looking back at the asterisks here, so that their effect of the synchronous operation in hunting, etc. All right, cool. Okay, so it thus follows that the armature reactance appears together with the armature current that is instantaneous. The armature reaction, however, is the MMF of the armature current in its reaction on the MMF of the magnetic exciting current. That is that the part x2 equals x naught minus x1 of the synchronous reactance, which corresponds to the armature reaction, is not the true reactance at all, consumes no voltage but represents the consumption of the field ampere turns by the MMF of the armature current and the corresponding change of the field. Since, however, the field flux represents the stored magnetic energy, it cannot change instantly, and the armature reaction thus does not appear instantaneously with the armature current, but shows the transient, which is determined essentially by the constant of the field circuit. That is, it is the counterpart of the field transit of the machine. If then an alternator is short circuited, in the first moment only the true self inductive part, X1 of the synchronous reactance exists, and the armature current thus is I sub 1 equals E naught over X1, where E naught is the induced EMF, that is the voltage corresponding to the magnetic field excitation flux existing before the short circuit. Gradually, the armature reaction lowers the field flux in a manner as represented by the synchronous reactance X naught, and the short circuit decreases to a value of I naught equals E naught over X naught. The ratio of the momentary short circuit current to the permanent short circuit current is thus approximately the ratio of of I1 over I naught equals X naught over 1 or X1. That is synchronous reactant to the self-inductive reactance or armature reaction plus armature self-induction to the armature self-induction. Yeah, naturally. In machines of the relatively low self-induction and high armature reaction, the momentary short circuit current thus may be many times the permanent short circuit current. The field flux remaining at short currents is that giving the voltage consumed by the armature of self-induction, while the decrease in the field flux between the open circuit and the short circuit corresponds to the armature reaction. The ratio of the open circuit field flux to the short circuit field flux is thus the ratio of the armature reaction plus the self-induction to the to the self-induction, or the synchronous reaction. Synchronous reactance to the inductive reactance X naught over X1. Thus, it is momentarily short circuit over permanent short circuit current is equal to open current field flux over short circuit field flux. And then we have armature reaction plus self-induction over self-inductance is equal to synchronous reactance over self-inductive reactance is equal to X naught over X1. Nice. Let phi 1 be a flux field at a three-phase alternator, or in general, polyphase alternator at an open circuit, and this alternator be short-circuited at time t0. The field flux then gradually dies down by dissipation of its energy in the field circuit to the short circuit field of phi naught, as indicated by the curve in phi shown in figure 21a. If m equals the ratio of the armature reaction plus self-induction over armature self-induction is equal to X naught over X1, it is phi 1 equals m times phi naught. And the initial value of the flux field consists of the permanent part phi naught and the transit part phi prime equals phi 1 minus phi naught equals m minus 1 times phi naught. This is a rather slow transit, frequently of a duration of 1 second or more. The armature currents I sub 1 through I sub 3 are proportional to the field flux phi, which produces them, and thus generally decreases from the initial value, which are many times higher than the final values of phi sub 1, or phi 1, thus are higher than phi naught, or many times, or m times, sorry, and are represented in figure B 21b. The resultant MMF of the armature currents or the armature reaction is proportional to the currents and thus follows the same field transit as shown by F in figure 21c. The field exciting currents is I naught at the open circuit as well as in the permanent condition of the short circuit. In the permanent condition of the short circuit, the field current is I naught combines with the armature reaction of F naught, which is demagnetizing to the resultant MMF, which produces a short circuit flux of phi naught. During the transition period, the field flux phi is higher than phi naught, and the resultant MMF must therefore be higher in the same proportion. Since it is the difference between the field current and the armature reaction F, and the latter is proportional to phi, the field current must also be proportional to phi. Thus, as it is, I equals I naught at phi naught. During the transition period, it is I equals phi over phi naught times I naught. let's see. Hence, the field exciting the current traverses the same transit and initial value of I naught prime to the normal value I naught as the field flux psi to the armature currents. Thus, at the moment of the short circuit, a sudden rise of a field current must occur to maintain the field flux at the time of initial value phi sub 1 against the demagnetizing armature reaction. And in other words, the field flux psi decreases at such a rate to induce the field current of the EMF required to raise the field current in proportion to M from I naught to I prime or I naught prime and to maintain its values corresponding to the transient I in figure 21D. As seen, the transients phi in I sub 1 through I sub 3 to F and I are proportional to each other and are field transit and are a field transit, sorry. If the field excited by the current I sub 0 or I naught at impressed voltage E naught were short circuited upon itself in the first moment of the current in the field would still be I naught, and therefore the voltage would be E naught, would have to be induced by the decrease of the magnetic flux, and the duration of the field transit, as discussed in lecture thrice, would be T naught equals L naught over R naught. If the field current in figure 21D of the alternator short circuit transit starts with the value of I naught prime equals M times I naught, and if E naught is is the EMF supplied by the field exciting the circuit from the source of a constant voltage supplied by the exciter to produce the currents I naught prime, the voltage is E naught prime, and M times E, or, yeah, let's see, to produce the current I naught prime, the voltage E naught prime equals M E naught must be acting on the field exciting circuit. In the field exciting circuit. That is, in addition to the constant exciter voltage E naught, the voltage M minus 1 E naught must be induced in the field circuit by the transient of the magnetic flux. As a transient of the duration L naught over R naught induces a voltage of E naught to induce a voltage of M minus 1 times E naught. The duration of the transit must be T naught equals L naught over M minus 1 times R naught, where L naught equals the inductance, R naught is the total resistance of the field exciting circuit. And see, the short circuit transit of the alternator, thus usually, is of shorter duration, and the short circuit transit of its field, and see, the more so, the greater M. That is, the larger the ratio of momentary to permanent short circuit current. In figure 21, the decrease of the transit is shown greater exaggerated compared to the frequency of the armature current, and figure 21 shows the curves move nearly in the actual near their actual proportion. And I am starting to lose focus here, so if anyone wants to finish this chapter out, and then maybe we could read a little bit of art before we end out for the night.
I can pick up.
All right, cool.
So the preceding would represent the short circuit phenomena if there were no armature transient. However, the armature circuit contains inductance also, that is, stores magnetic energy, and thereby gives rise to a transient of duration T equals L over R, where L equals inductance, R equals resistance of armature circuit. The armature transient usually is very much shorter in duration than the field transient. The armature currents thus do not instantly assume their symmetrical alternating values, but if in figure 21b, I1 prime, I2 prime, I3 prime are the instantaneous values of the armature currents in the moment of start, T equals 0, the three transients are superposed upon these and start with the values negative I prime, negative I2, or negative I1 prime, negative I2 prime, negative I3 prime. The resultant armature currents are derived by the addition of these armature transients upon the permanent armature currents. in the manner as discussed in paragraph 18, except that in the present case even the permanent armature currents I1, I2, I3 are slow transients. In figure 22b are shown the three armature short circuit currents in their actual shape as resultant from the armature transient and the field transient. The field transient, or rather its beginning, is shown in figure 22a. Figure 22b gives the three armature transient or armature currents for the case where the circuit is closed at the moment when I1 should be maximum. I1 then shows the maximum transient, and I2 and I3 transients in opposite direction of half amplitude. These armature transients rapidly disappear, and the three currents become symmetrical and gradually decrease with the field transient to the final value indicated in the figure. The resultant m.m.f of the three phase currents, or the armature reaction, is constant if the currents are constant. And as the currents decrease with the field transient, the resultant armature reaction decreases in the same proportion as the field, as is shown in figure 21c by F. During the initial part of the short circuit, however, while the armature transient is appreciable and the armature currents are thus unsymmetrical, as seen in figure 22b, their resultant polyphase m.m.f also shows a transient, and the transient of the rotating magnetic field discussed in paragraph 18. That is, it approaches curve F of figure 21c by a series of oscillations as indicated in figure 21e. Since the resultant MMF of the machine with which produces the flux is the difference of the field excitation, figure 21d, and the armature reaction, then if the armature reaction shows an initial oscillation in figure 21e, the field exciting current must give the same oscillation. Since it's m.m.f minus the armature reaction gives the resultant field excitation corresponding to the flux phi, the starting transient of the polyphase armature reaction thus appears in the field current, as shown in figure 22c, as an oscillation of the full machine frequency. As the mutual induction between armature and field circuit is not perfect, the transient pulsation of armature reaction occurs with reduced amplitude in the field current, and this reaction is greater the poorer the mutual induction. That is, the more distant the field winding is from the armature winding, or the more distant the field winding is from the armature winding. In figure 22c, a damping of 20% is assumed, which corresponds to fairly good mutual inductance between field and armature as met in turbo alterations. If the field exciting circuit contains inductance outside of the alternator field, as is always the case to a slight extent, the pulsations of the field current, figure 22c, are slightly reduced and delayed in phase, and with considerable inductance intentionally inserted into the field circuit, the effect of this inductance would require consideration. From the constants of the alternator, the momentary short circuit characteristics can now be constructed. Assuming that the duration of the field transient is t0 equals L0 over m minus 1, R0 equals 1 second, the duration of the armature transient is t equals L over R equals 0.1 seconds. And assuming that the armature reaction is 5 times the armature, scroll down, self-induction, that is, the synchronous resistance is 6 times the self-inductive resistance, x0 over x1 equals m equals x, equals 6, sorry. The frequency is 25 cycles. If phi1 is the initial or open circuit flux of the machine, the short circuit flux is phi0 equaling phi1 over m, which equals 1 over 6 times phi1. And the transient phi is a transient of duration 1 second, connecting phi1 and phi0, figure 22a, represented by the expression phi equals phi0 plus phi1 minus phi0 times epsilon minus, or to the power of negative t, or negative little t over capital T0. The permanent armature currents I1, I2, I3 then are currents starting with the values m E0 over X0 and decreasing to the final short circuit current E0 over X0 on the field transient of duration T0. To these currents are added the armature transients of duration t, which start with the initial values equal but opposite in sign to the initial values of the permanent, or rather slowly transient. Armature currents, as discussed in paragraph 18, and thereby give the asymmetrical resultant currents in figure 22b. The field current I gives the same slow transient as the flux phi, starting with I0 prime equals mi0 and tapering to the final value I0. Upon this is superimposed the initial full frequency pulsation of the armature reaction. The transient of the rotating field of duration t equals 0.1 seconds is constructed as in paragraph 18, and for its instantaneous values, the percentage deviation of the resultant field from its permanent value is calculated. Assuming 20% damping in the field or in the reaction on the field excitation, the instantaneous values of the slow field transient, that is, the current I minus I0, since I0 is the permanent component, then are increased or decreased by 80% of the percentage variation of the transient field of armature reaction from uniformity, and thereby the field curve, figure 22c, is derived. Here, the correction of the external field inductance is to be applied if considerable. Since the transient of the armature reaction does not depend on the point of the wave where the short circuit occurs, it follows that the phenomena at the short circuit of a polyphase alternator are always the same. That is, independent of the point of the wave at which the short circuit occurs, with the exception of the initial wave shape of the armature currents, which individually depend. Scroll down, please. On the point of the wave at which the phenomena begins, but not so in their resultant effect. The conditions with a single-phase short circuit are different since the single-phase armature reaction is pulsating, varying between 0 and double its average value, with double the machine frequency. The slow field transient and its effects are the same as shown in figure 21a, A to D. However, the pulsating armature reaction produces a correction pulsation in the field circuit. This pulsation is of double frequency and is not transient, but equally exists in the final short circuit current. Furthermore, the armature transient is not constant in its reaction on the field, but varies with the point of the wave at which the short circuit starts. Assume that the short circuit starts at the point of the wave where the permanent, or rather slowly transient, armature current should be 0. Then no armature transient exists, and the armature current is symmetrical from the beginning and shows the slow transient of the field, as shown in figure 23, where A is the field transient phi, the same as figure 22a, and B, the armature current decreasing from an initial value, which is m times the final value on the field transient. Assume then that the mutual induction between field and armature is such that 60% of the pulsation of armature reaction appears in the field current. 40% damping for the double frequency reaction would about correspond to the 20% damping assumed for the transient full frequency pulsation of the polyphase machine. The transient field current thus pulsates by 60% around the slow field transient, as shown by figure 23c, passing a maximum for every maximum of armature current and thus maximum of armature reaction, and a minimum for every 0 value of armature current and thus armature reaction. Such single-phase short-circuit transients have occasionally been recorded by the oscillograph as shown in figure 27. Usually, however, the short circuit is closed at a point of the wave where the permanent armature current would not be 0. And an armature transient appears with an initial value equal but opposite to the initial value of the permanent armature current. This is shown in figure 21 for the case of the closing of the circuit at the moment where the armature current should be a maximum, and its transient thus a maximum. The field transient phi is the same as before. The armature current shows the initial asymmetry resulting from the armature transient and superimposed by the slow field transient. on the field current, which is due to the single-phase armature reaction, shows a permanent double-frequency pulsation, is now superimpose the transient full-frequency pulsation resultant from the transient armature reaction, as discussed in paragraph 20. Every second peak of the permanent double-frequency pulsation then coincides with a peak of the transient full-frequency pulsation and is thereby increased, while the intermediate peak of the double-frequency pulsation coincides with the minimum of the full-frequency pulsation and is thereby reduced. The result is that successive waves of the double-frequency pulsation of the field current are unequal in amplitude and high and low peaks alternate. The difference between successive double-frequency waves is a maximum in the beginning and gradually decreases due to the decrease of the transient full-frequency pulsation, and finally the double-frequency pulsation becomes symmetrical, as shown in Figure 24C. In the particular instance of Figure 24, the double frequency and the full frequency peaks coincide, and the minima of the field current curve thus are symmetrical. If the current were closed at another point of the wave, the double frequency minima would become unequal, and the maxima more nearly equal, as is easily seen. While the field exciting current is pulsating in a manner determined by the full frequency transient and double frequency permanent armature reaction, the potential difference across the field winding may pulsate less if little or no external resistance or inductance is present, or may pulsate so as to be nearly alternating and many times higher than the exciter voltage, if considerable external resistance or inductance is present. And therefore it is not characteristic of the phenomena, but may become important by its disruptive effects if reaching very high values of voltage. With a single-phase short circuit on a polyphase machine, the double-frequency pulsation of the field resulting from the single-phase armature reaction induces in the machine phase, which is the quadrature to the short-circuited phase, an EMF, which contains the frequencies, the function of 2 plus or minus 1, that is the full frequency and triple frequency, and as the result, an increase in the voltage, and a distortion of the quadrature phase occurs, as is shown in the oscillogram of Figure 25.
They are
Various
trying
momentary...
so hard. I'm sorry to interrupt, Toby, but it's driving me crazy. It's like the elephant in the room, the name of the thing that shall not be spoken. For some reason, these people will not use the word resonant, nor any context thereof. It's all over this language. This is all about resonance, and they won't speak it. Are you guys seeing this? Anyways, go ahead, Toby.
Wow. I kind of wish you had pointed it out sooner. That's really interesting.
That is storybook.
So, I'm going to continue here. Figures 26 to 28. Figures 26A and 26B show the momentary three-phase short circuit of a four-polar 25-cycle 1500 kilowatt steam turbine alternator. The lower curve gives the transient of the field exciting current, the upper curve that of one of the armature currents. In Figure 26A, that current which should be near zero. In Figure 26B, that which should be near its maximum value at the moment where the short circuit starts. Figure 27 shows the single-phase short circuit of a pair of machines in which the short circuit occurred at the moment in which the armature short circuit current should be zero. The armature current wave, therefore, is symmetrical, and the field current shows only the double frequency pulsation. Only a few half waves were recorded before the circuit breaker opened the short circuit.
Yo, one sec. Let me see. Okay, yeah, we only have one page left. I was gonna say, damn, man.
Yeah,
It's
it's been a long
like
one.
half.
Yeah,
Yeah, my bad. I thought I was
I'm wondering I'm down to get into some art, but I feel like a whole chapter of
Yeah.
art is quite a order.
Yeah, same.
And it might
Same.
not be
We
worth it
got-
if we're not going to do a whole chapter.
Yeah, we got super into this. So
yeah, let me
It's
go.
all
I
good.
can close it out unless anyone else wants to pick up for the last page and a half here.
Nah, just wrap it up, B.
Cool.
Oh, sure, I'll spell you off, man.
All right, go ahead, Stone.
Figure 28.
Nice.
Figure 28 shows the single-phase short circuit of a 6-polar, 5,000 kilowatt, 11,000 volt steam turbine alternator, which occurred at a point of the wave where the armature current should be not far from its maximum. The transient armature current, therefore, starts unsymmetrical, and the double frequency pulsation of the field current shows during the first few cycles that the alternate high and low peaks resulting from the full frequency transient pulsation of the rotating magnetic field of armature reaction. The irregular initial decrease of the armature current and the sudden change of its wave shape are due to the transient of the current transformer through which the armature current was recorded. Figure 25 shows a single-phase short circuit of a quarter-phase alternator. The upper wave is the voltage of the phase which is not short-circuited and shows the increase and distortion resulting from the double frequency pulsation of the armature reaction. While the synchronous reaction of X0 can be predetermined with fair accuracy, the self-inductive X1 is not such a definite quantity. It includes a transient component. The armature magnetic circuit is in mutual inductive relation with the field exciting circuit. At constant alternating current in the armature, the resultant of the armature MMFs and EMFs is constant with regard to the field, and the mutual inductance thus does not come into play. During a transient, however, the armature conditions change, and the self-inductance of the exciting circuit is partly transformed into the armature circuit by the ratio of the field turns to armature turns, giving rise to a transient effective component of armature self-induction, which depends on the relative rate of change of the armature and the field, and thereby is a maximum in the beginning and gradually decreases to zero in stationary conditions. This tends to lower the maximum values of the field transients and to increase the duration of the armature transient. This effect is materially affected by the amount of resistance and reactance in the exciting circuit outside of the field winding. There also exists a mutual inductance between the armature circuits of the three-phase machine, which results in an energy transfer between phases during the armature transient. The instantaneous power of the momentary short circuit current, and with it the forces acting on driving shaft and prime mover, are proportional to the short circuit current, being short circuit current times magnetic field flux. The forces exerted between the armature conductors, which tend to tear and strip the end windings, etc., are proportional to the square of the short circuit current. And there you go.
All right, boys, we did it. We made
Slide
it
to
to
number
Very
lecture
nice.
5. Nice. Thank you, Stone. Oops, accidentally closed it out immediately. It's unfortunate. All right, so yeah, we're gonna wrap it up. We're gonna close on that too, actually. So, Toby, you want to close us out?
Yo, sorry, I was muted. So yeah, thanks everyone for being here and reading from Charles Proteus Steinmetz with us. We plan on getting into Alton Harp, but as you saw, that was not going to happen after 2 hours of Steinmetz. So maybe I would say likely next week, but we'll see. So tune in next Monday. We always do reading nights on Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. But tomorrow night, as already has been mentioned once, don't miss Dr. Bennett, who's going to be here to give his second presentation on the Hildegard model. So come on by for that. That's going to be at 8 p.m. Eastern. And then on Thursday, join us on X or Twitter Spaces, as they call it, for a just a discussion, a live discussion for kind of an open discussion for whoever wants to join. I almost said round table, which is kind of funny because our round tables are our presentations on Tuesdays, which are really more of a presentation than a round table. But, you know, who's keeping track? In any case, thanks everyone for being here. And everyone take good care of yourselves. And we will see you all tomorrow night.